So far, we have studied Plato's philosophy from Plato's own perspective. We learned about the world of forms, the allegory of the cave, the philosopher king, justice, and Plato's criticism of poetry. If we stopped there, we might think Plato's philosophy is perfect and unquestionable. But philosophy never ends with one person's ideas. Every great philosopher is questioned by later thinkers. This is exactly what happens in this slide. The title says, Post-Structuralist Critiques, Deconstructing the Architect. Who is the architect? The architect is Plato. Why is he called the architect? Because Plato built one of the greatest philosophical systems in Western history. Later philosophers carefully examined that system. Instead of accepting it, they questioned its foundations. Today we will study two of the most influential critics of Plato, Friedrich Nietzsche and Jacques Derrida. Although they lived nearly 2,000 years after Plato, both challenged the very heart of Platonic philosophy. Friedrich Nietzsche, turning Plato upside down. Let us first look at Friedrich Nietzsche. Many scholars say that Nietzsche did not simply criticize Plato. He turned Plato completely upside down. Think of a building. Plato spent his entire life constructing a magnificent palace. Nietzsche comes along and asks, what if the foundation itself is wrong? That is how radical his criticism is. Plato's view. Let us quickly remember Plato. Plato believed that the physical world is imperfect. Everything changes. People grow old. Flowers wither. Buildings collapse. Nothing lasts forever. Therefore, Plato concluded that ultimate reality cannot exist in this changing world. Instead, true reality must exist in the eternal world of forms. The physical world is only a shadow. Nietzsche's exact opposite view. Nietzsche completely rejects this. He says, no, the physical world is the only real world. There is no invisible perfect world hiding behind it. According to Nietzsche, the world of forms is not reality. It is simply an idea created by Plato. Notice the word on the slide. Nietzsche calls the forms an idol. What is an idol? An idol is something people worship, even though it may not actually exist. Nietzsche argues that Plato created this perfect invisible world because he disliked the real world. He believed Plato feared change, suffering, the body, desire, and uncertainty. Instead of accepting life, Plato imagined another perfect world. Example: imagine a student who dislikes competition because exams are difficult. Instead of improving, the student says, real success doesn't matter. Only imaginary perfect success matters. That sounds comforting, but it also avoids reality. Nietzsche thinks Plato did something similar. Instead of accepting the imperfect world, he escaped into an imaginary perfect one. Nietzsche's philosophy. Nietzsche encourages us to embrace life exactly as it is. Life contains happiness, pain, failure, joy, loss, and struggle. All these are real. Instead of escaping them, we should accept them courageously. Therefore, Nietzsche says the changing physical world is not the problem. It is reality itself. Jacques Derrida, questioning the foundations. Now let us move to the second philosopher, Jacques Derrida. Derrida is one of the founders of post-structuralism and deconstruction. Unlike Nietzsche, Derrida does not simply reject Plato. Instead, he carefully reads Plato's own writings to show that they contain contradictions. It is almost like solving a mystery. What is deconstruction? The word deconstruction sounds complicated, but the basic idea is actually simple. Imagine someone builds a beautiful house. Instead of looking only at the outside, an engineer examines every brick, every beam, and every pillar. Eventually, he discovers small cracks hidden inside the structure. Similarly, Derrida examines philosophical texts. He asks, does this argument really remain consistent? Often, he finds hidden tensions and contradictions. Logocentrism. Look at the first important term. Logocentrism. The word comes from the Greek word logos, meaning reason, logic, or rational truth. Derrida says Western philosophy, beginning with Plato, always gives higher importance to one side of a pair. For example, reason is treated as superior to emotion. Speech is treated as superior to writing. Presence is treated as superior to absence. Truth is treated as superior to appearance. These are called binary oppositions. Plato builds many of his ideas using these pairs. According to Derrida, this hierarchy is not natural. It is created by philosophy itself. Example: imagine a teacher always says, science is important. Art is less important. After hearing this repeatedly, students begin believing science is naturally superior. But is that absolutely true? Not necessarily. It depends on perspective. Derrida says Plato does something similar throughout his philosophy. The Pharmakon. Now we come to Derrida's most famous criticism. Look at the word on the slide. Pharmakon. This Greek word has two completely opposite meanings. It means medicine and poison. At the same time, this single word becomes extremely important. Plato's discussion of writing. In the dialogue Phaedrus, Plato discusses writing. He worries that writing weakens memory. If people rely on books, they may stop remembering things themselves. So, writing can become harmful. In this sense, writing is like poison. But at the same time, writing preserves knowledge. Books allow ideas to travel across generations. Without writing, much human knowledge would disappear. In this sense, writing becomes medicine. Derrida's discovery. Derrida notices something fascinating. Plato wants to clearly separate good from bad, truth from falsehood, reason from emotion, speech from writing. But here, Plato himself uses a word that refuses to stay in one category. Pharmakon is both poison and medicine. At the same time, it cannot be placed into a simple binary. Therefore, Derrida argues that language itself is unstable. Words often carry multiple meanings. Because of this, absolute certainty becomes impossible. Meaning is always open to interpretation. Why this matters? Think about ordinary conversation. Suppose someone says, that movie was sick. Does sick mean unhealthy or excellent? The same word carries opposite meanings. Only the context tells us what it means. Derrida argues that language always behaves like this. Words never possess one fixed meaning forever. This directly challenges Plato's dream of absolute, unchanging truth. Comparing Plato, Nietzsche, and Derrida. Let us compare all three thinkers. Plato says there is one eternal truth, one perfect reality, and reason can discover it. Nietzsche says there is no separate perfect world. Reality is this changing, physical, living world. Derrida goes even further. He says even our language cannot completely capture one final meaning. Every text contains multiple interpretations. This slide shows that Plato's philosophy inspired later generations, but it also invited powerful criticism. Nietzsche rejected Plato's world of forms and argued that the physical world is the only genuine reality. Derrida challenged Plato's confidence in fixed meanings by showing that language itself is unstable and full of hidden contradictions. Together, these thinkers remind us that philosophy is not a collection of permanent answers. It is an ongoing conversation, where every great idea is continuously questioned, reinterpreted, and debated. That is why Plato remains one of the most influential philosophers in history, not because everyone agrees with him, but because every generation continues to argue with him. In the previous slide, we saw how philosophers like Nietzsche and Derrida challenged Plato's philosophy. They questioned his belief in absolute truth, the world of forms, and fixed meanings. But philosophy did not stop there. The next generation of thinkers went even further. Instead of simply criticizing Plato, they asked a different question. What if the things Plato rejected are actually valuable? That is exactly what this slide is about. The title says, Modern Echoes, Rehabilitating the Shadows. The word rehabilitating means restoring something that was previously rejected or considered inferior. Remember, Plato believed that shadows, copies, imitations, and change were lower forms of reality. Modern philosophers ask, what if those shadows deserve respect? Today we will study two important thinkers, Gilles Deleuze and Julia Kristeva. Both admire Plato's importance, but both transform his ideas in completely new directions. Part 1. Gilles Deleuze. The Simulacrum. Let us begin with Gilles Deleuze. To understand Deleuze, we must first remember Plato's idea. According to Plato, everything exists in a hierarchy. At the very top is the perfect form. Below it comes the physical object, which is only a copy of the form. Below that comes art, which copies the physical object. Therefore, art becomes a copy of a copy. The farther something moves away from the original form, the less real it becomes. Plato believes that reality always depends upon an original model. Deleuze questions this entire hierarchy. Deleuze asks a bold question. What if there is no original model at all? This completely changes everything. Look at the important word on the slide. Simulacrum. This is one of Deleuze's most famous concepts. For Plato, a copy is always inferior. But Deleuze says, a simulacrum is not simply a bad copy. Instead, it becomes something completely new. It has its own identity, its own reality, its own value. It does not need an original to justify its existence. Example: imagine a painter creates a beautiful landscape. Years later, another artist creates a digital version of the same scene. Then someone creates a virtual reality version. Later, an AI creates an entirely new version. According to Plato, each version moves farther away from the original reality. According to Deleuze, every version creates its own reality. Each one has value on its own. It does not have to imitate something else perfectly. A modern example: think about animated movies. There is no real dragon behind the animated dragon. There is no original creature being copied. Yet millions of people enjoy the character. The dragon becomes part of culture. It influences imagination, stories, games, and even emotions. Its value does not depend upon copying something real. This is what Deleuze means. A simulacrum creates reality, instead of merely copying it. Why this challenges Plato? This directly opposes Plato's philosophy. Plato always asks, where is the original form? Deleuze asks, why must there be an original at all? For him, difference, creativity, and originality are more important than imitation. Instead of climbing upward toward perfect forms, Deleuze celebrates diversity, change, and endless creativity. Part 2. Julia Kristeva. The horror. Now let us move to the second thinker. Julia Kristeva. She is a philosopher, literary critic, and psychoanalyst. Unlike Deleuze, Kristeva does not reject Plato completely. Instead, she discovers an idea inside Plato's own writings that later philosophers had almost ignored. This idea is called horror. What is horror? The word appears in Plato's dialogue Timaeus. Plato describes horror as a kind of space or receptacle. Think of it as a container that receives all things before they take shape. It has no fixed form, no permanent identity. It is constantly changing. Plato compares it to a mother who receives and nurtures life before birth. An easy example: imagine soft clay. Before you shape it, it has no definite form. It could become a cup, a plate, a statue, or a toy. The clay itself is not yet any one of these things. It simply has the potential to become all of them. Kristeva says horror is something similar. It is the space where possibilities exist before they become fixed. Kristeva's new interpretation. Kristeva gives this ancient concept a completely new meaning. She connects horror with human psychology, especially with the earliest stage of life, before children learn language. She calls this the semiotic realm. Notice the important phrase on the slide. Pre-linguistic. This means before language develops. Before a baby learns words, it already experiences rhythm, sound, movement, emotion, touch, and music. These experiences are meaningful, even without language. Language and emotion. According to Christopher, human communication has two sides. One side is logical language, grammar, rules, and reason. The other side is rhythm, emotion, music, poetry, and feeling. Plato mainly values the first side. Christopher reminds us that the second side is equally important. Example: think about a lullaby. A baby does not understand the words. Yet the baby becomes calm. Why? Because rhythm, tone, and sound communicate something beyond language. This is what Christopher calls the semiotic realm. Meaning is created not only through words, but also through emotion, sound, and movement. Why this challenges Plato? Remember Plato's criticism of poetry. He believed poetry mainly excites emotion instead of reason. Christopher disagrees. She says poetry is valuable precisely because it reaches this deeper, pre-rational part of human experience. Poetry expands language. It challenges rigid thinking. Instead of weakening meaning, it creates new meanings. Comparing Deleuze and Christopher. Now let us compare these two thinkers. Deleuze questions Plato's belief that copies are inferior. He argues that every image can possess its own independent reality. Christopher questions Plato's belief that reason should always dominate. She argues that emotion, rhythm, poetry, and the unconscious also contribute to human understanding. Both thinkers restore value to what Plato placed in a lower position. Why this slide is called Rehabilitating the Shadows. Now the title becomes clear. Plato believed that shadows, copies, and emotional expression were inferior. Modern thinkers say these are not weaknesses. They are important parts of reality. The shadow is not merely a shadow. It has meaning. The copy is not merely a copy. It creates something new. Poetry is not merely emotion. It reveals aspects of human experience that logic alone cannot express. This slide shows how modern philosophy continues its conversation with Plato. Gilles Deleuze rejects Plato's hierarchy of original and copy by arguing that every image or simulacrum possesses its own creative reality. Julia Kristeva transforms Plato's concept of horror into a theory of human language and psychology, showing that rhythm, emotion, and poetry are essential parts of meaning. Together, these thinkers teach us that reality is richer and more complex than rigid categories allow. Instead of rejecting copies, emotions, or change, they invite us to see them as creative forces that continually reshape our understanding of the world. In this way, modern philosophy does not simply oppose Plato, it enters into a dialogue with him, proving that even after more than 2,000 years, Plato's ideas continue to inspire new questions and new ways of thinking. Now we arrive at the final slide, which brings together everything we have learned about Plato into one unified framework. This diagram is called the Platonic matrix because it shows that Plato's philosophy is not a collection of separate ideas. Instead, every concept is interconnected like the gears of a machine. If one gear moves, all the others move together. Let us begin from the center. At the very heart of Plato's philosophy is ontology, the study of reality. For Plato, the highest reality is not the physical world around us but the world of forms, especially the form of the good. The form of the good is the ultimate source of truth, justice, beauty, and wisdom. It is like the sun that gives light to everything else. Without it, true knowledge is impossible. The next gear is epistemology, which asks, how do we know reality? Since reality is the world of forms, knowledge cannot come only through the senses. Instead, the mind must rise from imagination and opinion to rational understanding. This is exactly what we saw in the divided line. The mind progresses through 4 stages: imagination, belief, thought, and finally reason. Only reason can grasp the eternal forms. Now we move to the third gear, psychology. Plato believes that knowledge transforms the soul. The human soul has 3 parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Justice within the individual exists when reason governs, spirit supports reason, and appetite remains under control. A person who understands the good naturally develops a balanced and harmonious soul. The 4th gear is politics. Plato argues that a just society is simply a larger version of the just soul. Just as reason rules the individual, Philosopher kings should rule the state. Spirit corresponds to the auxiliaries or soldiers, who defend society. Appetite corresponds to the workers, who produce goods and provide economic support. Justice in the state exists when every class performs its proper function without interfering with the others. Notice how perfectly these four areas connect. Ontology tells us what is ultimately real. That reality shapes our epistemology, or way of knowing. Correct knowledge produces a balanced psychology, or soul. A balanced soul creates a just politics, or state. This is why the gears in the diagram fit together so perfectly. If one part fails, the entire system begins to collapse. For example, if people seek wealth instead of wisdom, appetite begins ruling the soul. That produces unjust individuals. Those individuals eventually create unjust governments, leading to oligarchy, democracy driven by uncontrolled desire, and finally tyranny. So, Plato believes that political problems are ultimately educational and philosophical problems. The solution is not simply changing laws. The solution is educating people so that reason governs both the individual and society. Now let us read the grand synthesis on the right side. Plato teaches that ethics, politics, psychology, epistemology, and metaphysics are not separate disciplines. They form one complete philosophical system. To understand ultimate reality requires rational knowledge. Rational knowledge produces a harmonious soul. A harmonious soul creates a just society. This is Plato's complete blueprint for human life. Final conclusion. As we conclude this lecture, we can see why Plato remains one of the greatest philosophers in history. His ideas shaped Western philosophy for more than 2,000 years. Whether we study metaphysics, ethics, politics, psychology, education, or literary criticism, Plato's influence is everywhere. Although many later thinkers like Nietzsche, Derrida, Deleuze, and Christopher criticized or challenged his ideas, they all began their discussions with Plato. That is why the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead famously remarked, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato." This statement reminds us that understanding Plato is essential for understanding the history of philosophy itself. Thank you for watching. If you found this lecture helpful, please like, share, and subscribe for more complete lectures on philosophy, literary theory, and UGC NET, SET, GATE, and PGTRB English preparation.